afternoon. Thank you so much for joining our next edition of Live with Marketers. And we're live today from our London office for the first time. I'm really excited to introduce our panel of guests today, two of which have actually flown to be here, which is very, very exciting. First, I'll introduce myself. My name is Grace. I'm the host today of Live with Marketers, our talk show bringing together some of the greatest minds in marketing in Europe. I'm a content marketer based in our London office, and I'm really, really pleased to have everyone here today. Before we get started and I introduce our topic, I just want to do some quick housekeeping notes. So if you've joined on On24, you will receive the recording of the webinar afterwards. You're also able to add questions in our Q&A box, and my team are here monitoring them throughout, and I will give those to my panel at the end of the show. If you're not on On24 and you're joining us on YouTube or LinkedIn Live, you're more than welcome to add questions as well. Just use the hashtag #LiveWithMarketers and you can get involved. So our topic today is talent, creativity, and the future of marketing. And I have three great marketing leaders here with me today. I'm going to ask you guys to introduce yourself and tell me one interesting or strange thing we might not know about your team. Namrata, can I start with you?
Sure, I'm from LinkedIn. I take care of LinkedIn Learning EMEA marketing. Started at LinkedIn 4.5 years ago, started on this team a year ago. Interesting fact is we speak 7 languages across the 4 of us, and we're an all-female team.
Now, I go to you, Mo, next.
Yeah, sure. So I'm from HP, and I manage the EMEA social media team. One interesting fact about my team is that we're all remote. None of the team members are sitting in the same city, with one exception where we have 2 members in one city here in London.
Amazing. And Ray?
Yeah, thanks, Grace. So I'm Ray. I work at a company called Teamwork. We're a software company headquartered in Cork in Ireland. Interesting fact about my team, we're an eclectic bunch. In my team, I've got somebody with a PhD in art history. I have somebody who's had a long career in local radio, and a lead singer of a band as well. So a real diverse bunch here.
Amazing, yeah. Sound like a very creative group.
Yeah, they are. They're a lot of fun.
What do you bring to the table in that group?
Tough question. Yeah.
No pressure.
No pressure.
So Ray, you've had quite an interesting journey to becoming a marketing leader and head of the marketing team at Teamwork. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure, Grace. I mean, I guess, when I graduated about 15 years ago, my first kind of foray into life post-graduation was a role as a web developer within a marketing team. And I suppose since then I've kind of weaved around from a technical role in web development to project management, again within the creative and marketing fields, before actually ending up in a B2B marketing team officially, I suppose, about 10 years ago. So I've kind of meandered around a little bit, but always working very closely with marketing teams. I guess maybe what I've found as I've kind of matured and as my career has grown as a marketer is that when I reflect on kind of the journey to becoming kind of a head of marketing, kind of a grounding in technical roles, as a web developer and having that background has been really invaluable because I can have the conversations with my technical teams who are building assets or whatever that is. And then equally on the project management side, I think the principles of project management are just such an important grounding for, I think, for my own team. Several of my team have done the PMP this year, for example. I think they're just a great grounding for people developing a career in marketing. So it's led me, I suppose, around the houses. I spent about 5 years at Marketo and then leading the team at Teamwork. So yeah, been a journey.
Amazing journey, yes. Namrata?
Yeah, I've been, since I completed my MBA in the US, I've been in tech marketing. I was in product marketing before, and I've been all across the globe. So I've worked in the Middle East, I've worked in, obviously, Asia, I've studied and worked in the US, and most recently moved to Europe. And I've been in both startups as well as large organizations. I really like fast-paced, high-growth companies, which is really what brought me to LinkedIn 4.5 years ago.
So I started my career in Cairo. I studied actually architecture, and my first job was at Mercedes-Benz. I was an advertising specialist. Then I moved to General Motors, where I was managing the Opel brand in Egypt. And then I moved 10 years ago to HP, where I did advertising, different roles in marketing and advertising. And 6 years ago, I made the switch into social media. It was actually inspired by the Arab Spring and how things were changing in my country back in Egypt. I could see the power of how social media is making change, and I believe this is what marketing is all about, change. So I switched my career into social media.
Amazing. Yeah, really interesting journeys and also different. I think that's the special thing about marketing is that people come from these different backgrounds. You're bringing a lot of different things to a team, like you said, Ray, like the different aspects of your team's skills that are there.
Yep.
Namrata, I have to say a huge congratulations to you and your team. So Namrata this week for LinkedIn Learning, where her team launched their first out of home in London. So you might see it when you leave the office later in the tube or on the buses and a couple of the tube stations as well. It's very exciting to see them out in the wild. Over the last year, you've been building your LinkedIn Learning marketing team. What are some of the things that you have had to consider building that team from the ground up?
Yeah, there's just so many things to consider when you're hiring someone and trying to build a team and making sure that they gel and drive impact. But there are three main things I look for. One is diversity. It's not just gender or orientation, but it's also about background, experiences, ethnicities, just bringing a diverse set of experiences to the table and a diverse skill set. The second piece is really looking for different seniority levels. So you want people who can roll their sleeves up and get the work done, but you also want people on your team who can think strategically and look at the big picture. And the third piece is really around, especially at LinkedIn, I think a culture fit, where you want to make sure they share the same values as the company, whether that's leading with integrity, driving results, giving open, honest, and constructive feedback, or really sort of coming to the table with solutions, not problems. And that's kind of a blend that I look for as I've started to build out the team over the last year.
Yeah. Amazing. And when you are building out that team, I think we've all heard in the media over the last 10, 15 years, I guess it's been going on, people come up with some wacky interview questions. So I know there's one that I heard is how many red doors are in London? And I know that they're looking for abstract thinking, but personally, I hate them. And I think it really tells how good you are at BSing more than anything else.
Fair enough.
Is there any question that you would ask to really get a sense of those candidates that you brought in?
Yeah, so I have a favorite question, which is not the abstract, how many red doors and how do you get water out of some type of interesting glass. What I ask is, we all have bad days at work, and how would you define a bad day at work for yourself? Because what I find is that gives you a lot of insight into actually what frustrates the candidate and how they then deal with that frustration and problem solve for it, which again is a really important part of who I hire. Mm-hmm. Any others?
Yeah, I think for me, like you, I don't kind of like the abstract. I think for me, it's really, really basic. It's not going to blow anybody's minds, but I think just simply asking them, so if I'm hiring a demand gen marketer or a content marketer, I'd ask them to critique what we're currently doing. I know it's really simple, but I think for me, it kind of answers two questions for me. First, have they done their due diligence on you and the role? Do they really want it, basically? And then secondly, I think what I really kind of want when I'm hiring is people who will challenge the status quo. So the answer I don't want is, you're doing amazing marketing all around, you don't need to do anything different, because if that was the case, I don't need to hire you. So I think the other thing I just bear in mind when I'm doing interviews and hiring, I think, and I don't know if you guys agree with this, but I think, as a marketing leader, I think you are effectively hiring people to make yourself obsolescent. You're kind of almost trying to hire people around you who are so good at what they do that they can take your role ultimately. I think
build the leaders in the
future.
future.
Exactly. You're if you're doing it right, you're actually hiring yourself out of a job.
Yeah, I agree.
It's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, maybe it's what my CEO is.
I hope your team are watching now and they're like, he's out.
Yeah.
So Mo, your team are all working remotely. So you said you have two people here in London, and I'm sure that they impress you on a daily. But is there any example or any experience you've had with them where they've managed up and really, really wowed you?
Yeah, so actually I remember when I first took the role, I was on vacation in Spain, and I was thinking to myself, like, how do we get a remote team that works effectively and creates a team culture within a remote team, which I know is difficult. I did some research to see how we can create that team culture. And something that I read about Navy SEALs that was really interesting for me, it's called dynamic subordination, which is basically the person best positioned to lead dynamically becomes the leader within the team. So in marketing terms, this means the best person positioned to lead a campaign or a marketing initiative automatically becomes the leader. And that's not very easy to implement. It's not easy to say to the team, just become leaders and then they become leaders. You need to give them the space and the support to do that. I'm extremely lucky with my team. They constantly manage up, so it's an ongoing thing that they keep doing.
Amazing. I think this is going to be a great show for your teams to watch. And their heads are going to be huge when you go back to your offices. I guess one thing that every marketing team can find as a challenge is around sales and marketing alignment. How do those teams gel? They often have different objectives. They're often given a bad rep and kind of compared as chalk and cheese. They're not having the same things. Ray, how do you foster a strong relationships between your team and your sales teams at Teamwork?
I think, Grace, I completely agree. For me in my career, the alignment with sales has been the hardest aspect of marketing. I think customer acquisition, demand generation, creating great content is easy, but it's about the relationship with sales, which I think I've found the most challenging. I think there's a guy called Ben Horowitz. He's kind of a legendary founder and VC guy from the US who does create a lot of content around his experiences. Yeah. He talks about this concept of there's no silver bullets to it. It's this kind of 1,000 lead bullets, which is, it's all the small things. So those, I suppose, for me, the small things are kind of the weekly meetings between the head of sales, head of marketing. It's the demand gen team sitting with the SDRs or the business development teams. It's all of those things which will be the lead bullets in this situation. But I think to kind of counter my use of that analogy, there are silver bullets to relationship as well. And I think without respect between the two teams, so the head of sales and head of marketing truly respecting what the other's role is in growth, I think that you will be in trouble. And then just a couple of other things, just trust. I mean, when marketing commits to whatever, executing an event or delivering a campaign, and the sales follow up on the other side of that, that if the trust isn't there, then you're not going to go anywhere. So trust and respect, I think, are the silver bullets to the relationship.
Yeah, I think we're very lucky that we sit with sales teams in region, but I think to the point around trust and accountability, I always tell my teams you have to be accountable to deliver what you've promised. That's how you build the trust and the credibility. Jeff Weiner says something which is consistency over time. That really helps build that trust and credibility. I also think we believe a lot in constant and open communication and being completely transparent about what we're working on and maybe what we cannot work on because of our priorities. So that's how we've tried to navigate that relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really the mindset of we're in it together that helps a lot.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think from my level as well, it's kind of the social aspects as well. It's like going to go have a drink or have lunch and sit with the sales teams and all these kind of things and build that personal relationship, even if you're not best friends, but you do have, their kids' names or whatever it is, kind of take an interest in their life outside of the working day.
Yeah, I mean, people are the hardest thing in marketing. I think, your own team and then obviously your customers. And
yeah, exactly. Definitely. So there's lots and lots of different trends and new and modern things coming out the whole time. Mo, how do you keep your team up to date on new trends? And is there anything you're particularly excited about at the moment?
Yeah, sure. Trends and new technologies are extremely important. There is a huge advantage for companies that adopt new technologies early enough. Thinking about LinkedIn, so companies who have joined LinkedIn much earlier had a lot of advantages in terms of community, understanding the platform, being up to date with the latest products. So in HP, we do a lot of things actually to follow these trends. It could be as simple as following influencers or publications that talk about these trends, so that makes us aware of them. The second thing we do is usually test it. So we have like a test and learn setup where the teams can easily, on a small scale, test the technology. And if we think it's useful for our business or potentially will have a good use for our business in the future, we then adapt it. And then the third thing I would say we do is we learn it. And for that, we need learning platforms that can help us to learn it very quickly.
Yeah. I think that's, Mo was giving a fantastic example earlier of how he sets aside time for his team on a weekly basis to actually engage with online learning. And I think that's such a great practice that we need to ourselves follow. I think I'll also look at industry conferences as like a big source of inspiration. And then we used to do something on our previous teams, which was marketing we love. And we would share like these interesting campaigns, like the Spotify campaign that shares, is out of home and shares like little data points about what people are listening do and it's funny and it's humorous, or the recent campaigns with Marmite around Brexit. I think these are all just really interesting examples of getting creative with very local relevant topics. So that's what we do as well.
Great. I've just got a quick note here from our tech team as well, saying we're having a couple of technical issues, but it's all going to be on the recording. So if you have missed anything, or if anything has been a little bit awry, we will send it out afterwards and make sure that it's live on the LinkedIn Showcase page as well. So don't worry, you're not missing any of this good stuff. I just want to quickly give that announcement before we panic anyone. So that's great, guys. Thank you so much. Ray, I'm going to throw a very difficult question at you now.
Go first.
Creativity.
Yep.
So you have a very creative team, as you've mentioned already, in very different ways. It takes on so many different forms, but if you were to define creativity in marketing, what would be your definition?
I think for me, when I hear creativity, I just can't decouple it from problem solving. I just think they are one and the same thing. No matter what discipline in life you're working in, I think creativity is all around finding a solution to something that is a challenge. So some of the most creative people in my life, have been, like, my dad was a builder, and he just, whatever problem there was, he would come up with a way around the problem. In my team currently, I have a web developer who is the guy who integrates our market automation with CRM and our back-end systems. And again, he's not an artist, he's not somebody who creates beautiful websites, but he creates solutions every single day creatively between the systems that we have. So I think for me, creativity is all about problem solving. Now, that can take many forms. I mean, we rebranded the company earlier this year. We had a creative director who his problem, he had to solve how to visually represent the brand we had kind of defined in words into a visual identity. And again, that's just another type of problem solving. I may be kind of castigated by, obviously creativity, there's a freedom in art, so expression without kind of, a meaning or whatever. But for me, I think there is a strong correlation to problem solving.
Yeah, I definitely agree. A scrappiness, I guess, as well, that comes into creativity is sometimes, especially as a marketer. No matter if you're in a small company or a big company, you need to think of creative ways to get what you want done and over the line quite often.
But I think that's what's great about marketing, is it's at the intersection of both creativity and, data science, like using data to actually fuel that creativity and vice versa, seeing whether the creative is actually, getting the results that you want, which is why marketing is so interesting. But yeah, problem solving is how I define it as well.
Yeah. So I read a scary statistic recently. So it's from Marketing Profs, which is a really good newsletter that I get from the US. And it was that 90% of, and this was UK marketers, classify themselves as stressed because of work. And it's a huge number. It's a really scary number. Yeah. I don't think I'm that stressed. If my manager is watching, I think I'm all right. I'm quite enjoying my job. But Mo, I was wondering, so at LinkedIn and on my particular team, we do a lot of things to try and combat stress and also give our teams a little bit of time back. So one thing is no emails after 6:30 in the evening, no emails on the weekend, no meetings after 12 on a Friday. So there's simple things, but if we all stick to it, we get a little bit of time back. It just gives you some more time to be productive. Is there anything you guys do, especially with your remote team, to try and combat stress?
Yeah, absolutely. Being a remote team, but also being a team that's focused on social media. And I'll use a term from Wall Street, money never sleeps. You can say the same for social media. Social media never sleeps. So it's extremely important for us to manage that stress and time. And I think really it's really about prioritizing the right things, having clear objectives on what the team is trying to achieve, and being absolutely focused on business results. Because I think people a lot of times get distracted by urgent things that are not necessarily important. And when that happens, actually they shift away from the important things and they get distracted to the urgent things. And that creates even more stress. And we don't perform very well when we're stressed. So it's kind of a downward viral into being more stressed. So the other thing is also busyness as a proxy for productivity. A lot of time people assume because they're busy, they're being productive. So I think as a lead, I don't support like this. Of course, sometimes there are urgent and important things happening, and that's when you're busy, but that's not something that happens a lot.
I think just tied to that, Mo. I think the role of the marketing leader, I think, is with your team is to kind of to give them perspective at times to when there is that busyness. You know,
Exactly.
you're launching a big campaign. You know, you need to be able to take a step back and just tell them, you know, just put it in perspective for them, because, you know, at the end of the day, you know, we are marketers, we're not heart surgeons, you know, so just I think you have to be able to take them out from the weeds and just kind of give them that transparency, I think.
And to the management point, I think as a leader, if you have your team's back and your team knows that you would do what's, you know, you would have their back with stakeholders,
Yeah.
and that you're doing what's right for the business, and that you have those priorities and those guidelines and those goals and objectives for the fiscal year, and that you will go ahead and do, you know, focus on those, and they know that you'll back them up in stakeholder meetings. I think that kind of autonomy and trust lets them really fly. And I know I have that in my current management relationship. And so I think that helps a lot with balancing that perspective and managing that stress. Putting things in perspective, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a manager, I used to be in a more technical role, and I was my manager when I started. I think I was maybe in week 1 or 2. And the way he put it to me, in it was a brilliant way, and I had never heard it before, was that if I work extra hours, he can't get more headcount. So I'm doing him a disfavor by staying late, because there's no track record of me being there, but I'm getting the work done. So from his perspective, it meant that his team couldn't grow. But I just thought it was a really interesting angle, a really interesting way to look at it that I just had never seen before.
Yeah.
So a kind of follow-up question to that is that some studies state that there's a direct correlation between stress and creativity. I know, Mo, a second ago you said that you can't be productive when you're stressed. Do you guys have any angle on that, or what do you agree or disagree?
I think there are, to this point of studies, there are two different schools of thought saying that stress actually fuels creativity, because you need to problem solve in a very time-constrained manner or situation. I actually disagree with that. I think as marketeers who are sort of 50% creative, 50% data-driven, you really need that headspace to actually take yourselves out of, you know, sort of firefighting and focus on, well, where is the business going, or where are the challenges with the business? How do I drive the business forward, and how do I do that creatively so that I stand out in the marketplace, which is really our role. So I actually think stress fueling creativity is probably not the most productive way I'd like my team to focus on thinking of creative solutions. I'd rather give them the headspace to do that by prioritization.
Yeah, I agree. One of my favorite quotes on creativity is from David Lynch, and he compares creativity to fishing. So he says basically, you know, you don't create fish, you just catch fish. And creative ideas are similar to that. You need to create the space in order to be able to catch an idea and follow through.
I think, completely agree with both Narmada and Mo. My team kind of laugh at me sometimes for being too philosophical about things, but I think stress is a negative thing, and my, I suppose, philosophy in life is that, you know, in the long run, you know, good things won't come from a negative source. So stress can maybe get a campaign over the line, it can make you work the hours to deliver something, but it's not sustainable in the long run, I don't think.
Yeah. Definitely. I think your teams are going to be very happy to hear that.
That's a great statement, actually. Yeah.
Narmada, you touched on a couple of times where analytics and data fits in with creativity. And Mo, I was wondering, where do you see measurement and analytics when it comes to creativity and innovation? How do they fit in? How do they gel?
They're extremely important, because when you create something, you need to have a source that lets you know what you created is useful or not. And I think social media does that very well. If you look at the next generation of creative people, influencers, they prefer to be called creators, actually. And that's what basically they do. They constantly post things on social media, and then they analyze the data, and then they improve their creative constantly. So yeah, I think it has a big role to do with creativity. And platforms like LinkedIn do this as well very well because of the analytics and the information.
You're really plugging us today. We didn't ask for this, but thank you, Mo.
We're loving it,
the
though.
perfect guest. No, it is about taking that step back, and I think that as marketers, we move so quickly. It is hard sometimes, and And I know I kind of have to give myself a slap on the wrist sometimes and say, okay, stop, go back, check what's working, especially when it comes to social media, because it's so easy now to get engaged and have all this engagement. But is it the right engagement? Is it actually driving the objectives that you wanted and the results that you wanted? It's taking that step back, I guess. So the marketing team has been called ground zero for disruption. That's in terms of new technology, new sources of information, applications of data, applications of tech. There's so much going on. Ray, what's the biggest shift you've seen? And is it a positive or negative one, I guess?
God, I think, first of all, like there could be a waffle alert here. I could waffle on this one. This is a question that I could go on for a long time. Let me see. I think for me, so right now, I guess, look, I don't know if you're familiar with this, the Martech Lumascape. So every year they publish the amount of technology that's available in marketing. So in 2011, there was 150 solutions available to marketers, software technology solutions. In 2019, it's over 7,000. So from a kind of a marketer's perspective, there is just so much going on in terms of new technology, new ways to engage and to attract and to nurture customers. So there's just a huge amount going on, a lot of noise out there. But I think from my perspective, I think as marketers, we are very guilty of almost not being in the present enough. We have technologies now which we can use to engage, and I don't think we're getting enough from those. But I think just in terms of the big shifts I'm seeing, I suppose, obviously things like AI are going to be impacting in a very tangible ways, like chatbots on websites. You have some great companies producing applications which run your website and engage customers, all driven through AI. So that's one area. I mean, voice is another area that I think is going to grow. You have obviously Alexa and Siri and all of that as channels, and I think over time they're not quite ready in terms of B2B yet, but there will be some application in the future. But in terms of a shift, I think what I find really interesting is the shift for major technology companies, particularly to go back to experiential marketing, so events, conferences. There's like, if you look at the budget going into events, almost every tech company, and I'm not trying to be funny by saying this, but they could have software which, like, it could be expense software, it could be something which is not very, interesting maybe to the broad, but they have a conference and they'll bring the best thought leaders from the world there. So I think it's really interesting the way, as we're becoming increasingly digital, the need for face-to-face and kind of experiences for customers to become more important. I don't know.
Yeah, it's the same thing that I think, because we, like, in a regional marketing role, you run kind of across a gamut of marketing disciplines, whether it's demand gen, brand awareness, product, all of that good stuff. And what I've noticed is the same thing, which is personalization has been such a great trend that we've had, and I think Instagram nails it. But in terms of the more digital that we become and the more at scale we can do paid advertising and paid search, I think the more there is a need for, that relationship building and that personalization, whether it's direct mail. Like, I've seen, campaigns we've run to executives, like HR executives, where we've given direct mail packages with like reports and content actually work really well, because they like that face-to-face touch. They like knowing there's a person behind that company, behind that social media platform, behind that data, behind that product. And I think it'll increasingly become a combination of how we do sort of account-based marketing for like really key value accounts, and then how we look at the at-scale approach through digital media. So I think having more of an integrated marketing approach is going to start to become the norm versus the exception.
Yeah, I agree. It's that mix between digital and physical that's extremely interesting.
Yeah. It's at this stage now, isn't it? When you get something in the mail, you're like, I wonder what. I didn't order anything, so it must be a bill.
It's not Amazon or ASOS or...
Just on your point though, Ray, I actually read a stat in Raconter the other day, and it said that marketers are now spending more money on tech than on labor. And I think that's quite scary, and I don't think that's the right direction. I think that it can do a lot for us. But as someone, a content marketer, basically in quite a traditional role, it's a scary stat for me. And I do know there's these AIs now that can build out blog posts based on what you want to read and all these things, but I think they're getting mixed feedback is what I've heard. But it's bringing me on to my next question about all these new marketing skills. So there's a couple that you've mentioned, there's AOR, blockchain, all these different things. We're bombarded with new information and new skills. How do you upskill, I guess, Namrata, your team, and what are the traditional skills that you try and hone in on with the team?
Yes, I mean, there's a platform called LinkedIn Learning. I'm just kidding. But yeah, we do actually look at a great example would be we're going through the annual review process at LinkedIn. And we do look at, well, what are the skills that you'd potentially want your team to upskill on? And how can we do this through a blended learning approach, whether it's LinkedIn Learning and setting aside time for that. Particularly, I think what we've seen on our teams is upskilling on the digital marketing side, like really understanding SEO and SEM, myself included. And how do you then kind of take a blended learning approach there where you're spending time online on online learning platforms, but then also offline where you might invest in classroom-based learning. And I find classroom-based learning to be really particularly helpful when you're dealing with management and leadership, like it's a new manager or you're getting promoted and you're going to become a leader in the business and you're dealing with like diverse stakeholders and you really need to kind of build your business acumen. Then we would suggest certain leadership courses, executive coaching, that type of stuff. In terms of pure marketing skills, I also look, as I said, I strongly believe in learning from other marketeers like we're doing today, and really going to industry conferences, subscribing to like Marketing Profs is one example, but there are so many other examples, including our own teams that produce Sophisticated Marketers Weekly. Just listening to podcasts, watching these webinars, and just having these regular subscriptions, and then setting aside time. I do this actually, I set aside time on Fridays to monitor what the competition's doing and monitor also sort of industry leading thought leaders and the messaging or interesting campaigns that they are sending out. And is there something we can glean from that? So I think as a marketer, it's constant learning because things are constantly changing. But yeah.
I suppose, I think they're all really, really good points. I think we kind of do a lot of them at Teamwork as well. I think, I don't know, is this the same thing, but also I think, in our performance reviews at Teamwork, we measure performance on the company values, and one of those is striving for excellence. So within our team, I suppose, we want to see people using their training and education budget. We want to see people kind of upskilling themselves and using the tools and the technologies that we make available to them. So I think measuring people against their willingness to grow and learn, I think, is also an effective tool.
Fantastic, yeah.
And is it similar in HP?
Yeah, and it's extremely important for us to be able to reinvent yourself because we don't know how the marketing job is going to be like in 5 years or even 2 years. The speed, the pace of speed, how technology is changing is, and there are forecasts that's going to be even faster in the future. So the obstacle to learn new things is, I would say, more of a psychological obstacle. So it requires the ability or the intelligence to constantly reinvent yourself as a marketeer.
And is there one, you mentioned digital and kind of upskilling your team on digital, is there one traditional marketing skill that you want your team to double down on? So for me, it would be obviously content editing and that skill of being able to know what's a really good piece of content that's short, sufficient, and that's my one anyway.
Yeah, I think for me, I don't know if you're familiar with Drift. Their VP of marketing, Dave Gerhardt, publishes a lot, and he says, in terms of like one of the skills, I think copywriting is, to your point, Grace, I think is one of those. It's just I have like quite a few friends who are kind of in they're lecturers in universities, and they tell me that the standard of writing is just dropping. And I think, we see that as candidates come in. One of the things I do, in interview process is get people to write something if it's a role which is ready to writing stuff. But I think copywriting is such an important art and skill for marketers. That's what I would kind of encourage my team to upskill on.
Yeah, super +1 on that, because as marketers, I think where we can stand out is making sure our subject lines and email campaigns are exciting and enticing, making sure the copy we're writing is actually relevant and draws the audience in. And I think, as you said, copywriting is becoming less of popular skill, and I think we need to go back to that because making sure as a marketer that you have the right messaging that will draw in your audience is just so important to what we do. So yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah, I think also storytelling, which is somehow embedded in copywriting, because what they call now the attention economy, like everybody's fighting for your attention, and if you don't send the right message and tell a story that your audience will remember, you probably lose their attention very quickly.
Very true.
Yeah, autocorrect has stolen copywriting from us. Those skills. Autocorrect and Grammarly, which I do swear by, but it makes it harder to hone in on those skills for sure. Mo, do you see the lines between marketing and other departments in HP or in organizations in general blurring? Where is the division is as clear as it used to be?
No, it's not. I think it's been blurring for quite some time. I would say when brands started to use social media, they could start to see that a customer looks at a brand differently than what brands had thought. A customer doesn't look at a company thinking of sales, marketing, and after sales. He just looks at a brand almost as a person. And when brands started to advertise in social media, they could see it's a two-way communication technology. So people started to speak back to brands. And that kind of forced brands to have a one voice to customer. I think the other thing is data. Brands, different departments in companies get different data points about the customer. And if a brand is able to mix this data point about their customer, they'll be able to serve them in a much better way because they're not just thinking of a customer as someone I'd want to sell to or someone I'd like to advertise or after sale, but really a person that they're trying to serve and help.
Yeah. I think I've heard examples of where marketing rolls into someone called a chief customer officer and vice versa, where then the chief customer officer is actually what used to be called a CMO. So I think it's fascinating about how you can bring the entire customer experience end to end, from like research on customers all the way through to product launch, and then feedback in that continuous loop. Marketing can really own that because we have access to those channels.
I think we talked about the relationship with sales earlier. I think the relationship between a marketing and however you describe it, customer success organization is as important nowadays because of exactly what Mo and Namrata said, the blurred lines and like the journey as the data points that they live across multiple teams, and marketing generally has kind of good oversight of the experience that customers are having. So yeah, it's becoming increasingly blurred between the departments.
I think expectations are very high as well when it comes to the consumer or whoever you are trying to talk to, because we have Amazon and Netflix and they're delivering these amazing, highly personalized one-to-one experiences that we're all then aspiring to deliver as well, because it's what the people are expecting, what I expect as well when I go online. So it's becoming more and more difficult and more exciting though. We have a lot of problems to solve, right? As you came back, creative problem solving to do for all of our teams. Guys, thank you very much for answering my questions. I'm now going to hand it over to the audience, but I promise they will be kind to you. So we are going to switch it over to the audience now. Thank you so much for adding your questions throughout the show. My team are on the other end of our computers looking at them on On24. If you are on YouTube or LinkedIn Live, you can still get involved in the conversation using the hashtag #LiveWithMarketers. So I'm going to flip over to the questions. And the first one I have here is around getting the right dynamic in a team, which can have a huge impact on your business. So, Ray, how have you ensured that you've built teams that gel? I think you inherited your team. So what activities do you do to make sure those people gel?
I think before I get into activities, Grace, I think something that Namrata said I think was really interesting and really spot on from my perspective, which was, I think if you have a team who can see that as a leader, you are going to go to bat for them, in terms of the other leadership within the organization, that you are going to fight their corner, in terms of, when difficult conversations happen, that you are behind them. I think that is one really key ingredient to gelling a team behind you, I think, for sure. In terms of activities, I think these are going to probably, I'm sure Namrata and Mo have some better examples, but I think, just having clear roles and responsibilities within the team, I think it's very simple, but I think that's really important for people being able to gel behind behind the mission of the team. And outside of that, then I think it's like you mentioned earlier, the social aspects of building the team, whether that's making sure, well, I know Mo, you have a remote team, but where possible, bringing people together as much as you can. Teamwork every year, we have this idea of, it's called a Grand Council, where every employee globally comes to Cork for a week and they sit together. So just getting people socially together as much as possible is really important. So there are a few things from my side anyway.
Yeah, we do stuff like, we have a great thing on our team where we do the How I Work email. So it's a template where you basically talk about what your needs are from a scheduling perspective because you have children or whatever else it is, or you like to go to the gym in the morning. Then you talk about what your likes and dislikes are and how you'd like to be, sort of communicated to and how you consume content. And so I think that's been a fascinating exercise. We also do something at LinkedIn called 5 Dynamics and Insights Profiles. So these are personality profiles. And typically when you're building out a team or even inheriting a team, we typically go through those insights profiles or those 5 dynamic personality profiles and walk through what those different colors and facets mean so that people understand how to work with each other and whether you're an extrovert or an introvert and those types of things. So I think that helps a lot.
Yeah, since we're a remote team, we get to see, the team get to meet physically sometimes once a quarter, and that's a great opportunity because they really make use of the time. So face-to-face time becomes a lot more valuable.
Mm-hmm. It is so much easier to be on a remote team now, I guess, with the technology that we have. Like a VC feels like the person's in the room.
Yeah.
But I've had many experiences in the last while at LinkedIn where I meet someone and I'm like, oh, hi, whatever. That we've never actually met in person. But you feel like you have because you've been on calls together and you feel like you have that relationship. But it's so much different than when you actually get that time together. Just a little bit of FaceTime is brilliant. There's so much that we can learn from our customers in all our different teams. And Namrata, I wanted to ask you, how do you open that dialogue is a question that came in with either through sales or through our SDRs. How do you get to the customer?
So we do, as a marketer, obviously one of the functions that we invest heavily in is market research. So we do a lot of it, especially in LinkedIn Learning. And essentially what we would do is do focus groups. So we would do what we call qualitative research, but we also do quantitative research. I love focus groups, sitting behind a wall and just listening to like ad hoc feedback where they don't know it's coming from LinkedIn, especially like the blind versions. I also heavily rely on the sales team. So I try and do 1 to 2 customer calls a month, which is not a lot. We really should be at the forefront, but I think that at least gives me an idea of how are our salespeople positioning our product? Is it being positioned consistently? As well as what are customers' challenges and what do they need from us and how are we solving for those challenges? And then the other way I do it is really at conferences. So we obviously sponsor a ton of events, but we also go to industry conferences, either via sponsorship or through speaking slots. And I love to really sort of then take an hour out at the booth or even in the evening receptions and really just talk to them. So I think we have multiple channels where there's market research, there's sales, and there's direct customer feedback. And I think that's vital to kind of keep growing as a team and keep creatively problem solving.
Mo, there's a question here that I have to give to you. So it's around a lot of new job titles have emerged over the last few years, social media being one of them, so the head of social media. Is there any that you've seen emerging recently or any that you've seen just completely disappear?
I think there will be constantly now new job titles coming because of, again, the speed of technology. So I think blockchain is something that's being discussed a lot and has a lot of opportunities. Virtual reality and augmented reality are also really interesting areas. Ray, you've mentioned voice or conversational AI. I think these kind of job titles that help teams and create teams that would support these technologies are going to keep on popping up.
Great. So the next question I have here is one quickly for you, Namrata. Their company is getting access to LinkedIn Learning next week, and they would love to know what should they look at in terms of their comms for learning before they get access.
Oh, so we do a number of things, and one of them is we obviously have a customer success team that would partner with them in terms of launching. We've seen some really interesting launches. We had TomTom actually launch it as a game, like a video game app to their engineers. We've also seen Adidas and companies like that do really huge like company town hall type launches. Telenor is another situation or another company where it was a directive directive from the CEO, and he did a 40-hour learning challenge. So we assist companies with launching LinkedIn Learning. Typically, it's a close partnership with our customer success team. And then once the licenses are activated, we want to make sure learners are continuing to engage with the platform. So there's a series of comms that comes through that. But typically, it should be a close partnership with the customer success and sales team.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that helps whoever asked that question.
That's great. Welcome to LinkedIn Learning.
Yeah. There's a question here from Mohammed, and he's asking, what as a marketer haunts you? So I think this is quite similar to the what keeps you up at night question. If I throw it at you, Ray.
What haunts me as a marketer,
Yeah.
is it? Oh, God.
Or is there anything right now that is keeping you up at night that you really are thinking about a lot?
Like, it's a pretty broad answer, but I would say, like, just the speed of competition in every market. So we have 5 products, and just the speed of competition that are kind of coming into every market that we're creating products in is just incredible. I mean, you know, Mo works in, you know, paid advertising on the social side. And, like, you know, we see, like, for example, we could be spending our digital advertising spend every month, and then all of a sudden we have a very serious competitor that we didn't know about a month ago. So I think the speed of competition, I mean, and it's completely natural. It's very easy to spin up products nowadays. But that for me is kind of one thing which is a kind of real challenge for us as a marketing team.
If anyone wants to share, I feel like it's a therapy session now, so you can get it out.
Let me get started now. I think it's about speed of competition is definitely one. I think it's continued investment in new and creative ways of going to market and proving the return on that investment, and which is, I think, for everyone, even outside of marketing.
Great. I think there's quite an interesting question here. And we've talked about how your teams can foster good relationships with the sales teams. So we're thinking at the same level. How, from your perspective, can you ensure that executives get more involved with marketing and they become your advocates, and then that kind of is a waterfall effect? Is there any advice there or anything that has worked well for you? We go for you, Mo?
Actually, I think what you've mentioned earlier about transparency, because you know, where departments are in it together, they're all trying to help the brand reach its objectives. And if marketing teams are very transparent on the results they're getting and get the support actually of other departments to help them rather than challenge them, move forward, is something that helps and also makes them feel a lot more involved in what marketing is doing rather than just review it.
I think to the executive teams or the leadership teams in organizations, like, you have to, I suppose, tailor how you communicate with them to the language that they will want. So, like, for example, you know, obviously the CFO of the organization wants to know how is it marketing investment impacting growth. So I think tailoring your messaging to the different executives is really important. I think staying away from communicating just the busyness of a marketing team as opposed to the impact, I think, is really important, because you could be doing a million things over here, but if it's not impacting the bottom line, then the executives are not going to care. So I think there's a couple of things there. I think just from a personal perspective, you know, I think we spend so much of our time trying to inform customers and acquire customers that I certainly, from my perspective, I've not done a great job at internal communication in terms of to the leadership team within roles in the past, but it's something I'm definitely working on, you know.
Something we've tried to do as well as a team, and it's from our director, Nico, try and have shared OKRs with our sales counterparts.
Yeah.
So something that we as a team are on either side is just one objective that this is what we're all going to work towards and we're all going to hold each other accountable for. So I think quite often that's a big issue as well, and it's come back to what you said there. If it's not driving revenue, sometimes it can be tricky to explain the benefit of something we're doing, or not immediately driving revenue is probably the better terminology there. So that longer term piece is quite important for us to be like, this is what we're doing and this is how long it's going to take for us to really show the impact of that. There's a couple of grads on the call as well, so graduates, and they'd like to know, is there one thing on a CV that you would personally look out for in a new hire?
That is such a broad question.
Yeah.
There's something I do look out for as somewhat of a red flag, which you know might not be the case with everyone that we look at, but I do look for progression in role or in career. And then the second thing I do sort of watch out for is short stints. Because I think that sometimes indicates lack of consistency, lack of motivation and interest. But do I look for any marketing skill? It totally depends on the role. Like we're hiring a product marketing person right now, and obviously what we're looking for is product marketing. But typically the applications we get through have that. Those would be the two, like the one thing I'd look for is progression. The downside would be, has it been many short stints? Yeah.
So this is a graduate kind of looking for their first role?
Yeah, a little bit of advice, I think, coming to marketing.
It's definitely, I suppose, the only thing that you could do, I mean, the experience won't be there to an extent, there won't be much experience, so maybe demonstrating, if possible, content they've created or their own opinions on things, write something would be a good way of doing it, and linking to it from your CV would be a good way of doing it maybe.
Yeah, I think what you said earlier, that a lot of people are creators now anyway, because they have their Instagram and all these different channels that they're constantly creating, so it's probably just like putting that into like a nice format to show off all the skills that you have and the way that you're thinking about your own personal brand that you could bring to a marketing team as well, which is quite cool. Yeah. And there's a question here which is a little bit ironic when we're on a live stream, but it's, do you guys think that webinars are declining, or do you still see the benefit in them? Because they have been around quite a long time now. I know personally for my team, we're actually seeing our webinars grow and grow and grow, and the performance is excelling. And I think it's because we get this chance to ask live questions and have that interaction that sometimes we're not able to have as such a big company.
I think for me, webinars still have a massive role to play. I think there's a lot of, like, to take an analogy from the podcasting world, there's a lot of long-form podcasts which are doing really well. Yeah. And I think webinars are absolutely a valid way of educating and bringing your customers along. So yeah, for me, they have a massive role to play still.
Yeah, we've just started investing in them from a LinkedIn Learning perspective. I do think the on-demand availability of it increases the efficiency of a webinar. And then again, I think podcasts is another channel that I'm fascinated by because I listen to them every morning, and that's something we're looking to invest in. But yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting how content is shifted into very snappy, quick content that you consume on the move, and longer form content that you consume when you have the time. Podcasts if you're driving, or webcasts if you're sitting and you have the time to watch them.
It's amazing that like 2 hours is like, it's obviously, it feels like a long time in today's world, but like I'd quite happily just plug into a podcast for 2 hours and not even miss it, So I think it's ironic that we've got this snappiness of kind of content over here, this snackable content, and you've got this long form, which is just as effective, I think.
Yeah. I'm ashamed to say that I've definitely binged a couple of podcasts where it's like 7-hour sprint, like, oh gosh, I've done my whole day in a podcast there. But we actually had another live stream this morning for our Live with Sales Leaders, and something I noticed, and it was really interesting, because it is this snackable versus long form. And we had it on LinkedIn Live, and we had a consistent amount of people stay on for the whole show. And it's the same when we run our webinars or our live broadcasts like this. People stay on for the full 60 minutes. It's really interesting because there was a school of thought for a while that people didn't consume like that anymore, that it had to be this really quick and everyone was on the move and they just couldn't sit down and do it. But I think it's going the other way, that people are, if it's the right content, they'll stay and they'll engage. Yeah. Speaking about the right content, is there one newsletter or one website that you are currently subscribing to that you would recommend for our audience? So Marketing Profs and Hanley's newsletter every 2 weeks. Anarchy is my one. It's long form, it's a lot of information. You probably have to give it a full half an hour to consume everything in there. But every second Sunday when it comes out, I sit down, I read the whole thing, and it's brilliant. Is there anything that comes to mind for you guys?
I like Medium. It's publication, and it's extremely interesting. It's again long form, but you can search with hashtags and you can get all the information from them. So I use Medium quite a lot.
Yeah, I like the Anne Handley one as well, Grace. I think it comes on a Sunday morning, if I'm mistaken, which is kind of interesting because it's a nice time of sometimes. I have 3 kids, so I don't have any time on a Sunday. But theoretically, if I did have time, it could be a nice time to have a coffee and read. But it's a really good newsletter. Yeah,
definitely a brilliant one. Anything coming to mind, Armada?
No, I
put
do
you on the spot now.
I do listen to a lot of podcasts. Like there's an HBR podcast that I listen to. I'm really into sort of understanding more about topics like radical candor and women in leadership. And so that's kind of the path I think that I prefer to listen to when I'm coming into the morning, but nothing marketing specific. I do read Sophisticated Marketers Weekly, though.
There's actually one from Kieran Flanagan and the guys at HubSpot. It's called Growth TLDR podcast,
right. Yeah,
which is
yeah.
actually really, they've got some amazing guests, and they go into like, it could be content marketing 1 week, demand gen, scaling a team, remote. It's just really good a resource to go to.
Great. So we probably have time for another 1 or 2 questions. This one, Mo, is quite interesting. And someone asked, so you mentioned earlier in the talk that social media never sleeps, which we know, it's all real time now. You need to have someone there and ready to answer, ready for every situation. The question is around how do you deal, or how do you see companies dealing with the generational gaps in social media use? So the different way that younger team members, it's phrased here, and a manager might deal with social media, just how that works.
So yeah, it's really interesting. Like you'd see, depending on the age, different platforms being used. So you'd see an older generation focused on a certain platform, and then the younger generation using a different platform. And I believe you need to talk to people via these platforms and use the right language and the right content that matches well the platform.
Yeah, my brother always shames me. He's 17. TikTok, I don't know what it is or how it works, really.
I've heard about it. Like, literally just heard about
He's
it,
like,
yeah.
I sent you a message on Snapchat. I was like, I don't have Snapchat. I don't know any of these things. So yeah, it definitely is. It's always changing. And as soon as one of them becomes popular and someone like me learns about it, it's probably gone again. Yeah. Starts again. I think we're going to finish up there. There has been a lot of questions. Unfortunately, I can't give them all to you. We will read through all the questions afterwards, though, and if there's anything specific that I want to call out, I will send it on to you. I want to thank you all for being brilliant guests. Thank you for flying from Geneva and Cork today. Thank you, Namrata, for joining us as well on a very busy week for your team, and congratulations again. To our audience, thank you so much to everyone who's joined. It's been a really great conversation. I hope you've enjoyed it. There's been some brilliant questions. Again, very sorry for the technical difficulties. If you missed any of the show, we will have it fully recorded, and I will share that afterwards. And you can also get it on my LinkedIn, Grace MacDonald at LinkedIn. Thank you so much and have a great day.